Okay, guys, so today we will discuss chapter number 1, part 2. It's a continuation of the first video. If you remember, in the first video, we discussed the why do we need security. Then we discussed some security breaches, and we also discussed the parameters of security, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So today we're gonna actually continue our discussion of chapter number 1. So we have two main things in this part. Firstly, I'll start with the domains of IT infrastructure, and the second part is process of a cyber attack. These are the two main agenda items that we're going to discuss today. So, firstly, domain of IT infrastructure. So, first thing is why we are discussing this domain of IT infrastructure. Why do we need to discuss that? So, before we plan any security, we need to understand where exactly we need to put the security, because each domain or each device or each environment, in fact, it requires a different kind of security. It has different security requirements, and that's basically what we need to plan. So firstly, we need to understand, for example, users. For users, we have different kind of threats. So if we have different kind of threats, so we have to, of course, provide different kind of security as compared to workstation and all that stuff. Like we don't have I mean, there's no threat of virus, for example, for users. I'm talking about computer virus, but we do have that virus problem or malware issue in workstations, and same the stuff with other modules that we're going to discuss. So before we plan any security, we need to understand the IT infrastructure, their connectivity, associated devices, and related threats. So in a typical information system, or you can say in a typical IT company, they just have these 7 domains, in fact. So IT companies have mainly 7 domains, and each domain, it has a different kind of threat, different kind of devices, and all that. So let's start with all these domains one by one, starting with the user domain. So all these domains are part of IT infrastructure. So let's start with first domain, user domain. User domain are basically people like employees and the users of the systems, like who can use the system. They basically come in this particular domain. So user domain, it include people, and people mean employees, and users come in this domain. So they can, I mean, employees and those users, they can actually access the system, like they have access to the organizational resources, in fact. Now, what kind of threats do we have from the people? So the first threat, or the biggest threat, is lack of user awareness, like education and all that stuff. Number 2, inside hacking. Like the people are the weakest link of any information system or any organization, in fact. So the biggest threat to our systems are basically from people as well. Like they are the protector, but we do have threats from them as well. So user domain, people, employees, users of the system who can access the system, they actually come in this domain, and these are the two main threats that we have from the people or users. In order to address the lack of user awareness, so we can actually organize some we can educate the users, organize seminars and stuff like that, and to avoid the insider hacking, surveillance, employees monitoring. Other than that, before we hire employee, a security check or background check is required. Could be really helpful, in fact. Next is the workstation domain. In this domain, it includes the organizational computers. So it includes organizational computers and digital resources, like computational resources, digital resources. Now that's basically what comes under in the workstation domain. Now, in workstation domain, if you see, the users can access the workstations. Now, in workstation domain, what kind of threats do we have? So, the first or the biggest threat is unauthorized access. Like unauthorized people, they can access that. Unauthorized access. The second problem is for example, because these are organizational computers or resources, it could be maybe printers, maybe other stuff. So we have another problem of malware. installation of the malware. Somebody can actually install malware, we can get viruses and all that stuff. So in order to avoid it, we have to implement, or these resources should have antivirus system, and there should be some proper authentication plus access control system. Okay, so access control methods, access control mechanism or authentication should be implemented on these computers in order to avoid unauthorized access. The next domain is the local area network domain. In this domain, this particular domain, it mainly encompasses computer networking components, and specifically local area networking components. Local area networking components, for example, switches, access points, and hubs. Okay, so what kind of threats do we have to our access point, switches? What kind of threats or the problems do we have in local area network? Like that's basically local area network where it is. So in local area network, we have a threat. It's packet sniffing. Somebody can sniff over packets. Packet sniffing is a problem. Unauthorized access. So these are the two main problems over local area network. There are many other threats as well, but these are the two main problems: unauthorized access to our devices, packet sniffing as well, like intercepting. Again, unauthorized access can be avoided by using authentication. If you implement authentication system, and packet sniffing can be avoided if we use SSL, or there are other security protocols as well, like where the information goes in an encrypted form. We'll talk about SSL in detail. Then we have the next domain is LAN to WAN domain. LAN to WAN domain, if you see this LAN to WAN domain, it includes mainly routers and some network security component. Basically, it connects remote users, some other remote location, your remote location with your, it connects basically the different networks, in fact, different local area networks of same organization mainly. So LAN to WAN domain, it's called gateway. It's called gateway, which connects remote locations. It connects remote locations and using wide area network. And wide area network is, as you know, internet, of course. Wide area network, and mainly it includes the devices are basically routers and network security app devices, in fact. And network security devices are basically firewall, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system. Okay, these are basically network security devices. So what kind of problems do we have with this domain? The first problem, unauthorized access. Unauthorized access. Somebody can access these. In order to get connected with your local area network or with your application resources, somebody can get access to LAN to WAN domain and then get connected. Another problem is the unauthorized port scanning. Like people can actually do port scanning to find which ports are open in your computer, which are closed, so they can actually get into your routers and all. Then vulnerabilities of routers and firewall. So vulnerabilities of routers and firewall, that could be another problem. And how we can fix it, of course, unauthorized access, authentication, VPN, port scanning. Some companies, what they do is they do the active monitoring of the resources. So if anybody does a port scanning, we can detect that, which particular port they have scanned and all. We can do that as well. So active monitoring of the system can avoid the port scanning. And the vulnerabilities of routers and firewall, we just have to keep our firmware update in order to avoid it. That's the only way. Okay, next is the WAN domain, wide area network domain. So we are right here now, WAN domain, which is mainly internet. So WAN domain is mainly internet, and the biggest problem because the problem, for example, if you have multiple office locations, so there is no way, we cannot bypass wide area network or internet, because for example, if you have one office here in Georgia, for example, and let's say if you have another location or a local area network in New York, in order to connect these two networks or these two systems, we actually use wide area network or internet. We do that. Another option is if you lay down a fiber or maybe a wire from Georgia to New York, which will be extremely costly, and you have to, there could be anything can happen to your wire. So you have to continuously monitor this particular wire as well. It could be optical fiber maybe, but it's impractical, of course. So what we use wide area network. And whenever we connect network by using wide area network internet, so there is a problem, because internet is a public network. It's a public network. So if, since it's a public network, anybody can actually access. Like, we can have bad people, they can also see over communication. So how we can actually avoid, or how corporate sector, how they actually address this issue, they actually protect, because the threat is sniffing, or you can say interception, eavesdropping is a threat. That's the threat. And how this threat can be avoided, VPN is a solution, virtual private network. So basically, most of the corporate sector, they use VPN. When you use VPN, what happens? It establishes let's say this is your computer, and let's say this is the remote computer. If you use VPN, it establishes a secure tunnel between you and your receiver, and then data goes in an encrypted form through that tunnel. If anybody is basically sniffing your data, they will see unintelligent blips and all. They will see nothing. Okay, so VPN is a solution to avoid sniffing and all. Then the sixth domain is remote access domain. Remote access domain, it includes the mobile user or users outside local area network. So users who are basically outside of your local area network and they want to access the organization resources, those users are called remote users, in fact. And remote users, how exactly it works? Firstly, remote users, they will be authenticated. After authentication, they can actually access resources via VPN. So then they can actually access the organization resources via VPN. Now, here, very important thing to remember is because most of the time authentication is based on, of course, credentials, like your username and password. Other than credentials, we also do device security as well, like device authentication as well. In fact, device authentication means like for example, you have, you work for Fiserv, or let's say Nexus Lexus. So Nexus Lexus gives you a computer, a laptop. So the MAC address of that particular laptop is also stored in their authentication database. So for example, even though if you use your own computer and you are trying to access your organization resources by putting your exact username and password, there is a possibility if they do the device authentication, they will not let you in unless you use the Nexus Lexus computer maybe. Okay, are you getting my point? That's basically that's why this device authentication and it's also very important. If you lost your device, then people can get into, or they can access the organization resources. So if credentials get compromised and device gets compromised, then remote access domain will be vulnerable, of course. Last is the system and application domain. System and application domain, it includes the organizational assets. It includes all organizational assets. For example, your web application server, databases, mainframes, information server, etc., etc. All the organizational assets, they are basically called system and application domain. Threats are basically downtime. Downtime is a threat. Secondly, unauthorized access. Like if you see, this is basically where system and application domain located, where we have this clouds and all that stuff. So anybody, a bad hacker, they can also get into they can try to, I mean, if you don't have good WAN security, they can actually get here. Or I mean, there are some other ways as well. So unauthorized access, downtime. Another problem is losing of information or data. That's another risk, in fact. So this is basically all the domains of IT infrastructure. Now we have a better idea like which domain has which kind of threat and what kind of security that we need to implement over there. Like the security solutions which work to protect user domain are not helpful to protect LAN domain or LAN to WAN domain and all. So each domain has a different requirement, different problems, and different security solutions. Now let's move to the next agenda. I mean, besides CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we have also nowadays we have added another layer of security which is called AAA. So AAA, it stands for I mean, it's again for better analysis of security to ensure optimal security. AAA it plays also a very important role. So AAA first is authentication, authorization, and then the third is for accounting. Authentication, what is that? Authentication, it ensures whether the individual is who he or she claims to be, not an imposter. Not imposter. So basically that is called authentication. And how we do authentication, we use username. Typically we use username and password, but we can use some other factors as well. For example, biometrics, we can use location, device, and all that stuff. These are some other factors. Chapter 4 is about authentication. We'll discuss authentication in detail. So authentication, it ensures whether you are the same who are you claiming to be, not imposter. And how we can do authentication by using username, password, biometrics, and all. So after successful authentication, now after then the authorization phase, it actually comes. So after successful authentication, the user will be given access to the resources which he or she is authorized to access. So in simple word, if you want to define what is authorization, so after successful authentication, so how much you can access with your resources, that is basically authorization. For example, I have a username and password to access over GGC whiteboard, the D12, and you guys have also the username and password. I have a different level of privilege. You guys have a different privilege. That is authorization. Next is accounting. It makes logs or tracks users' activities. So for example, whatever you do, it will actually make a log after giving you access. So in order to provide optimal security, the system, it should actually ensure CIA and it should provide AAA. So the system which ensure a CIA and provide AAA, it is called basically a secure system. And if any of this parameter gets compromised, it means security got compromised. For example, if the secret information of a company, it get compromised, that is attack on confidentiality. If somebody modify the data without being noticed, that's attack on integrity. If somebody, for example, launch a DOS attack to make the system unavailable for legitimate people, that is attack on availability. If somebody crack your password, that is attack on authentication. If somebody actually escalate the access, for example, you have a student access and you actually manipulate with the system and get the access of instructor, that is called attack on authorization. And for example, in accounting, if somebody modifies the accounting database, like for example, he did bad and he just modified stuff, so that is attack on accounting. Now, different type of hacker. I believe everybody is already familiar with the different types of hacker, but let me just give you a one-line definition that you need to know. These are the 7 main characters of information security world. First is the black hat hacker. They perform illegal activities. Illegal activities. In simple words, you can say they find vulnerabilities and exploit them for financial gain. Mostly financial gain or destructive, other destructive, whatever their agendas are. White hat hackers are basically hired by companies to find their vulnerabilities. What they do is they find vulnerabilities of the companies, of their networks and all that, of their web applications, and after finding the vulnerabilities, they report to them, report to concerned people. In fact, gray hat hackers are usually they are insiders. They pretend to be white hat hacker. They pretend to be ethical hacker, or you can say white hat hackers, but have hostile intentions. Then we have script kiddies, and as we discussed in the first lecture, 70% of our hackers they belong to this category. Script kiddies are basically amateur hackers having less hacking knowledge, they use scripts written by professional hackers and trick the people. They don't know what exactly inside that particular script. So those are the script kiddies. In fact, cyber terrorists, what they do is they attack the national websites of a country. Websites like, for example, their utility website, their e-commerce website, and stuff like that. So they attack their national websites, and nowadays the cyber warfare, which is mainly designed. Cyber warfare is basically like they're designed to disrupt, exploit, or you can say, disrupt, exploit, and corrupt the nation's computers or nation systems. In fact, cyber warfare is also considered as the cyber terrorism, because in cyber warfare, the two fighting countries, they try to level the battlefield by hacking other parties' national computers, their utility websites, and all. Hacktivist or hacktivism. Hacktivists, there's a combination of two words, hackers and activist. So they do hacking for political or social reasons. Okay, but again, it's not ethical hacking. Hacktivism is, of course, it is considered as hacktivism. Of course, that's not black hat hacking, that's not white hat hacking, but again, it's hacktivism, and you can go to jail for hacktivism as well. State-sponsored hackers like FBI, CIA, what they do, they spy other countries just to protect the nationals. For the national security, of course. Spy other countries and citizen. Just keep an eye on them. So these are different types of hackers and their activities. The last agenda for today is the process of a cyber attack. How a cyber attack, it actually executes. The first step, it involved mainly 8 steps. Let me just give you a basic idea. We'll discuss all these stuff, of course, in our class assignment, and you will experience in your lab as well. The first step of cyber attack is reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is basically collection of information about a target. So collection of information about a target is called reconnaissance. What kind of information? We need to find their IP address. In reconnaissance, we actually find their operating system. We actually find their server locations, the things that they care, stuff like that. There are many tools which we can use for reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is basically a very broader term. The footprinting and fingerprinting are basically the part of reconnaissance. So in reconnaissance, we use many tools like, for example, who is ID serve, we use nmap that we will, this is the tool that we will use in our class assignment as well. Nmap is basically used for to find operating system, find open ports, to find the to detect the firewalls and all that. So collection of information about the target is the first step in hacking or in to actually make a to launch cyber attack. Second, after finding enough information, then attackers they actually do vulnerability assessment. And what is that? Vulnerability assessment is identification or identify pitfall or weakness. Or you can say they try to find vulnerability. It could be existing or new vulnerability. So in order to find vulnerability, there are many tools that we can use. One of the best tool is Nessus, Z Attack Proxy. That's another tool. Zap tool, Arachne is another tool, etc. There are many other tools like OpenVAS, Acuntics, etc. There are many tools like that. So firstly, we collect information about the target. Secondly, we try to find vulnerability through which the systems can be compromised. And after finding vulnerability, we create exploit. So after finding vulnerability, the attackers create exploit. Creates C. Exploit. Exploit means malware, a virus, or something through which that vulnerability can be exploited. So we have data, information, we have identified a vulnerability. Now we have a malware as well. Now we have a malware which can exploit that vulnerability. Now, the next is how that malware should be delivered. So we need to get it delivered at a victim side or on victim's computer. And how we can get it delivered through a pop-up message. We can actually upload on website and redirect the attacker to that website. There are plenty of ways. Send via email attachment, anything. So you need to get it delivered. After it gets delivered on the victim's computer, now most of the viruses, they require human intervention. So human intervention is required to get it triggered. So human intervention means, for example, you need to open that file, you need to download that file, you need to visit that particular link. So let's say I have created a virus, I have upload the virus on my website, and I have sent you a web link. So once you visit that link, then the virus will get triggered. And after it gets triggered, the virus or the malware will be installed. Malware will be installed on victim's computer. So after successful installation, now attacker gives command remotely to the malware. So malware will become agent for attacker. So attacker actually give remotely commands to the malware agent, which was installed on the user computer, and then they can take control of the computer, turn that computer into the botnet, whatever the objective is. Last is the traces removal. Most of the malware includes rootkits. which removes the traces of malware after mission is done, to avoid the backtracking. So nobody can actually backtrack through by using those traces, to avoid backtracking. Okay. So that's it about our chapter number 1. If anybody has any question, any issues, so we can always discuss. So we mainly discuss two main things here. We discuss the domain of IT infrastructure, and we discuss the process of a cyber attack and types of attackers and hackers as well.